Welcome to the Glen Show. You could find us across all your favorite podcast platforms. You could find us on YouTube. And please remember to subscribe. Remember, for every person who subscribes, I get $1 million. And yet, we also have a sponsor of the show, firstseedfoods.com, which is healthy vegan Indian food without the butter, oil, or ghee. I love Indian food, but you go to Indian restaurants and the food is saturated with oil, very unhealthy. But not this food. It comes in containers like this. This is the chana masala, and it arrives at your door freeze dried. Go to firstseedfoods.com, put in the code Glen10 for $10 off your first order. My guest today is an old friend of mine, J. Morris Hicks, Jim Hicks. Holds a BS in Industrial Engineering from Auburn University and an MBA from the University of Hawaii, a degree he earned while serving as an officer in the U.S. Coast Guard in Honolulu. 2009, he earned a certificate in plant-based nutrition from Cornell and the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutritional Studies. In 2004, Jim began referring to our food choices as the most important issue in the history of humanity, having concluded that our future as a species was riding on those choices. His long-term vision began emerging in 3 books that he's authored since 2011. The first was Healthy Eating, Healthy World, which was followed in 2015 by the Four-Leaf Guide to Vibrant Health, co-authored with Dr. Kerry Graff. And then in 2020, he published Outcry, Urgent Alarms from Our Planet and What We Can Do About Them. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Glenn. Pleasure to be here.
Now, when you started your career, you were really in business, right? I imagine you thought that all was pretty much well with the world and you were just going to succeed within it.
Well, yeah, I studied engineering at Auburn University, and I was fortunate to get on the co-op program, cooperative engineering program, which provided me with a job to go to an industry 2 quarters out of the year. So every other quarter, I would go back and forth from school to work, and I was working for the Southern Railway System. So while I was studying industrial engineering to me is pretty much all about process improvement. And I had a place to try out the what I was learning in school at work because I was going back to a job every quarter. And so throughout my career, after I graduated, I went to work for a process improvement consulting firm. It's known as Kurt Salmon Associates. And it later was acquired by Accenture after I left. But it was a process improvement consulting firm, and I had many industrial clients, including Sears, Holiday Inns, various clients in factories, boardrooms, sales forces, warehouses. It was a really broad educational experience, which almost left me with a kind of the to be well prepared to look at the biggest, most important process improvement opportunity in the history of humanity, and that is we somehow stopped eating the right food for our species, and now that's basically more important than any project in industry I've ever done, to think about the fact that we need a global process improvement turnaround where we totally go back to the natural diet for our species. And the problem is we may have waited too long to do that.
Yeah. Now
And I
it's
don't,
interesting. Our friend Dr. Silas Rao is a systems engineer,
right.
and he also, of course, has come to the same conclusion. And he is, he's published papers. He's gone beyond where you and I can go in terms of the science of the world food system,
Right.
and the environment. But you and Silas are both engineers, and is there something about the engineering mind that has allowed you both to see what so few other people in the world can see, that it's our food system and the fact that we're eating the wrong food that is in fact the leading cause of the climate emergency?
Well, I think yeah, engineers are trained to improve things, improve processes, gather data. Gathering data is an extremely important activity for all engineers because we can't just go on opinions. We have to gather data.
Right.
And when you gather the data, it was 2002 when I first got curious about the optimal diet for humans, and that was actually triggered by a I was about to what was it in 2002? I was running an executive search consulting firm, and this is after 2001, where all of the search firms in the world pretty much collapsed after 9/11. So our search firm basically had no clients and had no revenue. And so I came up with an idea to do. I had made a speech to the Georgia Tech Alumni Association in Atlanta. I'm speaking to them because this whole group there that night were out of work, and so they like to bring in headhunters, to talk to them about things. And so my topic that night was uh, first get a life, then get a job. My seven secrets.
Hmm.
And so I had those seven secrets that kind of took about 20 minutes to 30 minutes to present that. And I was overwhelmed with the input of great interest from these tech students who wrote and just loved that whole talk that I gave about the seven secrets. And it got me to thinking, since that was so popular, why don't uh, I and my colleagues in my consulting firm, why don't we conduct one day get a life seminars and fly in people from all over from Chicago, as far away as Chicago, a day trip to the world's busiest airport, right? We were right downtown, easy subway ride. So we'd have a one-day seminar, and it was $199. Get a life, then get a job. Our sevens. So we call it the Get a Life seminars.
Uh-huh.
And so we each picked a topic. And so the topic, I one of my topics, my primary topic was food or health, getting healthy. And so we all started preparing for what could be a seminar in the next quarter. And but I got during that study, I ran across people like T. Colin Campbell and and John McDougall, and I learned about. I'm thinking, holy shit! But Memorial Day weekend, I read your book, Mad
Oh,
Cowboy, Mad
uh-huh,
Cow,
with Howard Lyman.
and Diet for a New America. I read those two books
Yeah.
over Memorial Day weekend in 2003.
Uh-huh.
And I'd been reading about health all the way up to that point. And when I got to Memorial Day weekend, that's when I said, "Oh my God, we're eating the wrong food for our species." And
So you were preparing to teach about staying healthy with
right,
diet, and it turns out you were learning about it. You didn't really know until you read these books.
right. I didn't. I had read "Fit for Life" by Harvey and
Uh,
Marilyn Diamond,
Right, that was an
and
old one, yeah.
then I had lost 10 or 15 pounds, had to take in my suits and everything, but then I'd go
Yeah.
right back to the other way of eating. And then, but it was your books that really clicked the light on for me. And I said, my God. And so those seminars never happened. Bottom line is because I hadn't looked back since then. And I thought that I could go into industry and let's say go to a company like my old client Sears, for example, and teach them how to save money on their single biggest cost line item, which was healthcare in their businesses.
Right.
And I got close at Staples headquarters in Boston because my son was working there
Uh-huh.
in middle management. But I never did get the first assignment. And so, I've just took it upon myself. Well, what can I do? And I I did 737 consecutive daily blogs when I first started blogging.
Uh-huh.
And then more recently, I'm publishing about one a week or two a week, something, just
Right.
whenever I feel like it.
And
But
if our listeners want to get your blogs, where do they go?
five letters, hpjmh.com.
Okay. Now, JMH stands for J. Morris Hicks. What does the HP stand for?
Well, it's done. It was going to be Healthy People, Healthy Planet was going to be
Uh-huh.
my book, and
But somebody had that?
somebody had that, and so I'd already gotten the website, and so it was HP, and so I just kept it. So Healthy People, Healthy Planet, and hpjmh.com, and
Okay. Um, so now let me go down a detour here.
yeah,
We'll see what happens. But you were planning to give seminars called First Get a Life,
right.
but you didn't do that. You went off to become a food and climate activist. So, what would you have taught people in First Get a Life?
In the Get a Life, well,
Yeah.
I
Let's hear a little bit of the content of those
well
seminars that never happened.
getting a life. Well, part of it was relationships,
Uh-huh.
and I can't remember exactly. I mean, it's been a long time
I'm
now.
putting you on the spot here,
Put me on
but
the
it
spot.
sounds intriguing. First Get a Life.
Well, I can send you the link to um, that thing later.
Well,
It's
that won't
on
help
the
my
website
listeners.
somewhere,
I
but it's
just thought there might be listeners out there thinking, how do I get a life? So
the
would one
seminars.
of the first things be try to find a great relationship?
No, it was get serious about your relationships and
Uh-huh.
get out. If you have any relationships that aren't bringing you joy, get out of it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Life's too short to be in relationships, whether they're friends or partners,
Right.
or so-called friends or acquaintances.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a little wisdom that we weren't expecting today, so I'm glad to have that.
Yeah,
Um, so as you read those books, including Mad Cowboy by Howard Lyman and me, and
yeah.
John Robbins' book, Diet for a New America, did your diet change overnight?
Uh, my diet had already changed. I was back in November, December prior year when I had given that talk at Georgia Tech. So
Uh-huh.
by the end of January of 2003, I was pretty much on the program. I'd canceled my colonic irrigation appointment that I had. I
Uh-huh.
I started noticing that some things that were coming out my rear end that I had never seen before. And I realized all of a sudden that my body was taking care of business now that I'd given it the right food. And, so
Uh-huh.
by February, March, I was 100%. I'd already lost 15 or 20 pounds and
Uh-huh.
I knew I was on the right track. And then it was Memorial Day weekend. I read those two books that reinforced the environmental aspects, which
Mm-hmm.
really more important than human health is environmental health, because without that, we all die, no matter how healthy we are.
Was the 15 or 20 pounds all you needed to lose, or did you need to lose more
No,
and you lost more?
no. Well, I recently got my own place. Uh, I'm no longer living with my wife 7 days a week. We have each have our own places. So once I got my own place again, I eat my 4 leaf meals, which are over 80% of my calories from whole plant-based foods every
Mm-hmm.
meal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm now down to my high school graduation weight of 137 pounds. And
Uh-huh.
I, my my tallest height was 6 feet. Now I think I'm 5'10" and a half or something like that.
Uh-huh.
My the top weight was 180, and
Uh-huh.
and that's when I started looking for how to get healthy and lose weight, and that's what really triggered it in the beginning. I wasn't obese looking, but I
Right.
could tell, this is not trending. That oh, and my physician had told me it's about time for me to start taking a statin drug.
Right.
So I have not ever taken any drugs. That's when I said I gotta change this. So
We're the same. I'm also at my high school graduation weight, and I have also never taken any drugs. And I'm about 140 pounds now. I had gone as high as about 160.
uh-huh.
I'm 5'8". And what happens in America, you know what people call you when you're 5'8" and 160? They call you skinny.
Yeah,
So
well, they do. Yeah,
yeah, I actually was carrying around 15 or 20 pounds more than I needed, but by
right.
American standards, I was skinny.
Yeah,
So, what made the difference was cutting out the oil.
yeah.
Um, all right, so you learn as you lose the weight and adopt the new diet that not only is this better for your health, but it's better for the planet.
Absolutely.
And at what point do you say to yourself, do you wonder, as I have, is everybody insane? How come nobody can see this?
Well, Glenn, I think about that a lot, and I realize, I mean, even in my own family, my son is the only family member, blood family member that I have, and his wife, he and his wife are the only two family members that I have, and I got a lot of family members, sisters and brothers and aunts and uncles, and but they are the only two that are truly eating a whole food plant-based diet, according to my four-leaf definition of over 80% of your calories from whole plant-based foods. And my daughter started kind of moving in that direction with her husband. They're down in Atlanta. But then, he's a hockey player, and he wanted to go back, and he wanted to have his fish and this and that. And so her kids are eating, sounds my this is reported to me by my son who has visited them. They're eating the standard American junk food, and so I mean, in my own family, Glenn, I've got my son, and my wife doesn't eat this way. I mean, she eats better now that she knows me, but she just doesn't get it. Doesn't really seem to care. And I got to thinking, if she were to get really serious about this and start letting me make all the meals, she would probably lose 20 pounds in the first 2 months. But I know what happens when people lose weight when we're older, and her face would be all wrinkled, right? It'd take a few years for her to for her skin to get used to this reduced size.
Mhm.
And so, I don't ever talk to her about it. I mean, she knows everything that I talk about, that I write about, that I speak about. And we have a lot of fun together. Everybody loves Justine. She's like the first person that gets invited to parties everywhere, and so uh,
Mhm.
she knows and respects what I do, but she doesn't practice what I preach, and nor does any of her family. And my son has 6 kids. One was adopted, and he had two with his second wife, and so anyway, he's got six, and none of them are truly eating a whole food plant-based diet. None of the kids, and 3 of them graduated college last May, and they're all super super animal food eaters constantly. So if if I can't, and then I look at uh, I started thinking, well, how many people have I actually influenced to do this? And it turns out to be a pretty low number. I look at my yacht club. That's the reason I moved back to Connecticut, was I wanted to kind of reunite with the yacht club where I'd met Justine, and I know about 500 people in this town. Everybody knows, everybody knows in the restaurants, at the yacht club, that oh, Hicks, Hicks, here's something you can have, blah blah blah. And for a while there was a Jim Hicks special on the yacht club menu. That's not there anymore because I left for about 10 years, and now that I'm back. But I'm thinking to myself, I know 500 people in that club and they all know that I eat differently.
Right,
Oh, here's something you can have, Hicks. And I don't proselytize, but everybody knows what I do. And I don't think there's a single person in Stonington, Connecticut, or now New London, Connecticut, or Mystic, Connecticut, that has been influenced by my work to change their diet. Now that to me is a piece of information that we all need to be aware of. And the piece of information is this information has got to come from a higher authority, in my opinion. And as you know, I guess I've been promoting this some sort of intervention with Mayor Adams at first. You may have read my stuff
yeah,
about him, and
yes, and
now
the
he's
mayor's fortunes have
oh yeah, he's
become a little bit
not going to.
checkered, let's say.
Reason was, but he wrote a book about
Yeah,
reversing his heart disease, and he'd gone out to visit with Dr. Esselstyn,
yeah,
uh, and so I knew early on that he wasn't. I tried for a year and a half to try to get him. I know people who work for him,
right.
and I was communicating with them. And we're in New York City, which is the media capital of the world, and we could get a half a dozen people. And once the light went on for a half a dozen uh, global newscasters, news personalities, if you will, I think that, and with some scientific and medical support there as well, with the Esselstyns of the world and the T. Colin Campbell. Unfortunately, there aren't many T. Colin Campbell. There's a lot of medical doctors that know the truth, but there's few nutritional scientists. And I happened to be on his board, and I was the first non-family member of his board, T. Colin Campbell, and he I know the details about what happened to him at Cornell, and how they basically, once they realized what he was doing, the agricultural department, the dairy science and the poultry science, and they have done their best to make T. Colin Campbell disappear. And there's a link to it's the Sagan and Campbell story. It's a link on that landing page of my website about those two. And um, Carl Sagan, who I love Carl Sagan. He explains the big picture better than anybody. The whole, the whole universe. But Carl Sagan and Colin Campbell were professors at the same time at Cornell. And they were 44, both were 44 years old. Both were superstars in their field. Colin was probably the leading nutritional scientist in the world up until he stumbled across the fact that animal protein was promoting cancer. And it's just sad. I mean, I was in the room for his last lecture at Cornell, and it was a bunch of students and a bunch of faculty. It was in a lecture hall at the building where Colin's office was. And this was back 15 years ago now. And there were faculty in there from the animal science department. And one of those guys called out Colin in the middle of his lecture to say, what kind of what kind of garbage are you feeding these kids here? You know, in front of the whole group. I mean, this was the way he was treated at Cornell, and they've done their best to basically make him disappear. Took his name off the wall, quit letting him give lectures in that facility, and as far as they know, he's disappeared. So I had 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago now, I suggested, I was on his board at the time, that we get a lawyer and sue Cornell. And he said he had thought about doing that. He said he wanted to call a few lawyers. And so I knew he wasn't going to do it. So 10 days later I called him back. Colin, you did you call any lawyers? He said, no, I'm so busy here. I said, would you like me to do it? He said, yeah, why don't you do it? So I did a Google search or something, and I found the world's leading legal authority on First Amendment, freedom of speech, when I found Floyd Abrams, who
Sure.
big law firm, prominent law firm in New York City. His son Dan Abrams is prominent in the
Sure.
news, and so Floyd Abrams, I couldn't believe it. He actually called me on the phone, and I saw his office, and I said, Jim Hicks, and he said, oh, this is Jim Hicks. And he called me himself, and we set up the appointment. Colin, I was living outside the city at the time, and Colin took the bus down there from Cornell, and we sat in Abrams' office for over an hour. And Abrams asked the questions. Colin did 90% of the talking, and Abrams was writing it down. I mean, he was taking it, and he had also gone to Cornell. I mean, so there was a Cornell brotherhood here, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, man, this is going to be great. Well, obviously it didn't happen, and Abrams said he gave it a lot of thought, and he suggested we go to this and that organization and try to get some help in that arena, but he chose not to involve himself in it. So
Mm.
that was just one experience, but that's probably as close as we came. And it's a real tragedy that we have the world's schools of nutrition are funded by the animal agriculture industry all over
Mm-hmm.
the world.
Yeah.
And and
And
so
and our Department of Agriculture is behind the nutritional guidelines that our government gives us.
exactly. And so I mean, I think that the only way we're gonna in this engineer's simple mind, the only way we're gonna turn this thing around is through the mass media, you know, making sure that every human in the planet understands we're eating the wrong food. It's an emergency, like if we were going to have flooding in New York City 2 weeks from now, everybody be working on getting out of New York City, right?
Right.
So, but we're not getting information, and nobody's
No,
hearing it.
no,
Uh,
we're not. And even, the progressive networks like MSNBC, they never present the information that you and I and Silas and so many others are trying to um, spread. As far as anybody knows in the media, the only cause of the heating of the atmosphere, the buildup of greenhouse gases, the only cause of that is the burning of fossil fuels. That's
right.
all we're being told.
And they don't, and we're not being told anything about the aerosol masking effect. If we could cut
Right,
it off immediately, but
right,
it would warm up even faster.
right. And to explain that for our listeners, when you burn fossil fuels, it sends greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which, yes, heat the planet, but it also sends sulfur aerosols into the upper atmosphere, which cool the planet. So, and the estimates I've read, I don't know what you've read, Jim, that roughly the cooling effects are roughly three-quarters as powerful as the heating effects.
Right.
So if in a fantasy, and this will never happen, so it doesn't really matter too much, but if in a fantasy we stopped burning fossil fuels overnight,
Hmm.
what would happen would be that the heating from the previous burning of fossil fuels, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, would stay in the atmosphere for a good long time, but the cooling aerosols would dissipate.
Right.
So that if we could overnight stop burning all fossil fuels, the planet would actually heat up in the short term.
Faster. It would
Yeah,
heat up faster if we
yeah,
suddenly stopped.
yeah.
And I think we got a little preview of that when we had 9/11 and air traffic all over the world stopped for a
Hmm.
couple of days. And we had some situations where we saw the effects of that. Super blue skies, clearer than we'd ever seen before. That was
Hmm.
that was the loss, temporary loss of much of the aerosol masking effect.
Uh-huh. Um, but beyond that, there are so many other reasons um, why the appropriate strategy is to immediately cease animal agriculture while we gradually work on reducing fossil fuel burning. And the most important of which I would think is the deforestation
Yes.
that is attendant to animal agriculture. There simply is no way mathematically to reverse global warming without without increasing sequestration of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We need those trees.
Hmm.
And, you know, the
Great.
analogy I often make, Jim, is to the US budget deficit.
Right.
Um, we have a deficit, it's a pretty significant deficit. And one side, the Republican side, focuses on spending and says, we just have to stop spending. And the other side, the Democrats, say, well, we need this spending for social goods, but we could increase taxes, particularly on the rich, and bring in more revenue. Well, we had a surplus when President Clinton was president, and what happened then was he increased taxes on the rich, and with the help of some Republicans, he cut spending. He did both sides. And when you do both sides, what do you know? Surplus. And so the attention to fossil fuel burning as the only cause of climate change, well, that's all about, if you will, the spending, our emitting of greenhouse gases. What about the revenue, which is taking in the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere? If we focus on the revenue, we'll find that just like President Clinton found when he balanced the budget, when you bring in some revenue, you could actually achieve balance. We need to bring in the revenue by having more than 3 trillion trees on a planet that used to have 6 trillion trees.
Yes.
Am I thinking like an engineer, Jim?
Yes. Yes. I mean, it's all arithmetic,
Yeah.
basic arithmetic. It's just gathering data about what's important and following where that takes us. And that's why I thought in May of 2003 when I read your book, I said, and
Now,
and
we must say Howard Lyman's book with my help.
John, I know John and you guys made a good team.
Yeah.
But it just seemed so simple at the time, and that was 12 years ago. No, 20,
No, more than that. It's
oh, 20,
arithmetic, Jim. It's
22
arithmetic.
years ago. 22 years ago when I
Yeah.
had that enlightenment and thinking, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. All we have to do
Yeah.
is spread this news to everybody. Boy,
Yeah.
was I wrong about that assumption.
Yeah.
And here we are.
And I do not think there's been one time that I can remember that the case that we make that we must end animal agriculture in order to reverse the climate emergency. I don't think there's been one time when I've heard that case made in the mainstream media. There was the movie, there is the movie, um, Eating Our Way to Extinction,
Right. Yeah.
which is a pretty good documentary. It
It's excellent.
actually understates the case that it makes because they use that old UN statistic of roughly 15% of
Oh, yeah.
greenhouse gases from
Published that data.
from animal agriculture.
Yeah.
They understated it by a mile. Um, but that was a documentary that was seen by millions of people. But on network television, I have yet to hear anyone make the case. Have you?
No, and they're not going to. I my theory is we've got to have a bunch of well-known independent journalists with integrity and willing to look at the big picture and understand the big picture. And I believe that there are people like that with integrity. They just are ignorant. I hate to use the word ignorant, but they're ignorant of so many things that you and I almost take for granted after all these years.
Hmm.
And once their light goes on, I'm thinking about the Katie Courics of the world and those people. They could say they could basically because a lot of them are independent now. Katie Couric, for example, has got her own podcast like you do, and so many other people
She and
have.
I are often compared.
Yeah, you're often compared. Yeah. So, but until we get, I mean, look at our entire medical system and medical schools. They don't teach this. And do you know a physician anywhere that's eating a whole food plant-based diet other than
Oh,
Tom?
of course I know some.
Well, yeah, they're the handful of friends that we have that happen to be
Right.
doctors. But in med school, they don't, the whole healthcare quote industry is built around drugs,
Yeah.
get people sick and then give them drugs. And so the meat and dairy people get them sick and the pharmaceutical, everybody makes money on it. And Cornells of the world are right in the middle of it. And, you know, I was trying to I actually reached out. I'm a personal friend with James Cameron, movie
Right.
executive, mogul. And I was trying to interest him in having a movie about what happened at Cornell and a movie about the lives of Carl Sagan and T. Colin Campbell. And he has
Were they friends, by the way?
no, Colin has said he met him, but
Hmm.
they didn't really know each other. Or they didn't
Hmm.
collaborate at all. Uh, but they were both equally as popular or as esteemed up until Colin, you know, uncovered a truth that nobody wanted to hear.
Hmm.
And, and Colin, a man of integrity, after being raised on a dairy farm, thinking that, that was the science he wanted to go into, was making dairies more profitable and
Right.
better and healthier. And you can imagine how that kind of scientific information, when he found it was a study that was conducted in the Philippines a few years prior. This is going back into the late 60s, I think, 70s. And he couldn't believe that data that you could turn off cancer on and off just by, you know, um, varying the supply of animal protein in the animal's diet. And so he had to go back to Cornell and kind of under the radar conduct his own lab studies to make damn sure he was right or they were right. And turned out they were right. The Indian researchers were right. Uh, and so, his life has never been the same since.
Right. And of course, for many decades, we've heard that animal protein is superior when in fact plant protein is superior because animal protein is carcinogenic.
And what do the farm animals eat? They
Yeah,
eat plants.
yeah.
They eat nothing but
And
plants.
and and they know to do it without even reading the China study.
That's right.
Yeah.
So imagine a movie, a James Cameron blockbuster, which he could basically introduce it. This is a drama based on facts.
Hmm.
And
And did James Cameron ever get back to you with on that idea?
he only gets back to me these days if I anger him in some way. I angered him one time back uh, almost 7 or 8 years ago when I wrote a piece about the habitat out in the desert where they lived there under a little
Uh-huh.
dome, glass dome, and they
Yeah.
grew their crops and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
I had written a not so glowing article about that team out there at that in the desert.
Yeah.
Turns out that team, all seven of them, were friends of James Cameron. And so he sent me a blistering email. And and so I'm thinking to myself, well, you know, I've I've been to James's several of his homes. I mean, I know him and
Uh-huh.
his wife pretty well, and kind of consider him a friend. And but yet this was problematic. So I said, before I'm gonna take my time before I write him back. And so
Uh-huh.
I wrote him back, and I basically said, I apologize for what I wrote. I just didn't dig deep enough into the facts, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to take that one down and I'm going to replace it with a better one. So I did
Okay.
that, and then he sent
Okay.
me this really nice, warm note, kind of a lengthy note.
Uh-huh.
In it was a couple of sentences that comprise cover the cover message on my third book, which is called Outcry, which is
Mm-hmm.
available for free on that same landing page.
Right.
Yeah. So and so I wrote him back and I said, can I use this paragraph or these sentences on the cover of my book? You approve that, and I put your name on it. And he then wordsmithed it a little bit. He actually took it serious if this was going to be publicized. And so he sent it back and he said, yeah, you can use it like this. And so I did. And he has produced, directed more than his fair share of the greatest movies of all time, including Titanic. And if he did a blockbuster movie, his movies are all hits and they all get in the main theaters, and a lot of people could understand if we had a movie about the life story of Carl Sagan and Colin Campbell, two guys 44 years old at the same time at Cornell University. One's a hero and one's practically run out of town. But Cameron, I think he's now calling New Zealand home. He's
Yeah.
got a place down there, and I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't have an underground place for his family. I think he's basically said it's over. And Glenn, I hate to say it, but I'm not getting any younger. I've been like preaching this for 20 some years now, and it's something has got to happen differently. We're not just going to get more people to choose to be vegan out of the blue. And and the word vegan anyway, just to me is it's not a word that, well, there's some data on that, and I'm not sure of the pure accuracy of this, but there are now more ex-vegans in the developed world or in the United States than there are vegans. more ex-vegans than vegans. And that's pretty easy to see why. It's shitty to be a vegan and you go in a restaurant, they got one thing you can eat,
Hmm.
and you go out with your friends and everybody's worried about what you can eat, so they quit inviting you to parties and
Yeah.
kind of
It's like asking people to join the unpopular club.
right. It's
Yeah.
not, and it doesn't mean anything. It only says describes what you don't eat, where
Right.
what you do eat is what's important.
So,
So
so this idea of having James Cameron do a blockbuster movie that supports our cause is a great idea, but the dilemma is that he won't respond to you unless you insult him, apparently. So, so here's what I want to suggest. Let's talk about a great movie for James Cameron to direct. I have an idea.
yeah.
And then you send him an email that starts, "Hey, dummy, why the heck don't you make this movie? What are you thinking, dummy?" And try to insult him enough that he gets angry and responds.
Well, you could be onto something there, Glenn.
Yeah, that may be our best hope.
I think in my case it was, you know, 10 years ago, and now everybody's 10 years older, and he's off. I don't think he's going to do any more movies.
Mm,
He did that other repeat of the ones with the underwater thing. I forget the name of it, but he's the master. He's the master of movie making, and
yeah.
it's a shame. But I don't I really think that he doesn't think anything we do is going to change things.
Well, there's a case to be made for that. He's got a lot of evidence on his side if that's what he believes.
But I know that people like you and I and Silesh and others are not going to give up.
Yeah.
Can't give up.
Uh, it is it's kind of depressing when I think about how the world has gotten worse since I was young. You know, when you're young, you're told about the glorious future, how things are going to get better. And that's the natural way of things. I mean, my parents wanted me to have more education than they had, and I did. But along with that came a sense of, oh, the world's getting better.
Yes. Uh-huh. I thought
And
that.
yeah, and there are some things that are better. I'll tell you one thing I like a lot is Zoom. It would have been
Yeah.
great if, as a kid, I could have gone on Zoom and spoken
Right.
to people around the world. So I'm not doing a commercial for Zoom, and I know there are other
They
equivalent
deserve it.
platforms, but I think that's an improvement in the world. But I can't think of too many other improvements. You know, I'm not sure that cell phones are an improvement. They seem to be causing so many tragedies with young people, especially when people get addicted to these screens.
Oh yeah.
So much suicide in the world. And then the population is out of control. Um, and politics, when I was young, when I was in high school, there were the Watergate hearings.
Yeah.
And all right, we didn't have a very good president at that time, but there were these grown-ups in Congress, Republicans and Democrats, who were investigating the president's crimes, and
Yeah.
they had the integrity, whether they were Republicans or Democrats, to say, no, we have to step up and do the right thing. That is unimaginable today. It is just unimaginable that each party would hold their own leaders to account.
You know, the big greens, the green organizations, the
Yeah,
environment, nature conservancy, all these people.
yeah,
Everybody thinks they're doing great work, right?
yeah.
Well, I have an anecdote quick anecdote about that. We're in a meeting at James Cameron's home with all the famous doctors that we know, you and I both know, and a few other
Right.
people. And in addition to those people and some of their wives, we had Nelson Campbell and Colin Campbell and Esselstyn. We had the crowd there. And James Cameron, and we also had a few of those Greens in there. The CEO of the Nature Conservancy was in the room, and the number two guy at the Environmental Defense Fund was in the room. There's 25 people sitting around a big round table in their kitchen, believe it or not, at their
Mm-hmm.
ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And James Cameron singled out those two guys from the uh, the Greens, and he said, "Hey, I've been looking at both of your websites, and I can't see anything in there about dietary choices and its impact on climate change." And he looked at the guy from EDF right in the, and I had flown out there with that guy. Oh, that guy's since unsubscribed from my work in the past year. He's got tired of hearing about it because he feels guilty. So he asked him in front of everybody, well, why is it that you don't mention anything about animal agriculture when it comes to global warming and climate change? And he said, well, you know, I have to say, if we came out, if we even hinted that we were coming out against anti-meat, it would destroy our fundraising. Now that's pretty sick, right?
Yeah.
Pretty sick. So it prompted me to come up with this slide at the end of my latest talks. And it's got the images of those environmental NGOs up at the top. And it's got the book, The Bright Green Lies. Have you read that book? You should read it.
No.
It's a good book. It's hard to read, but it's got a whole lot of data in it. And so one more thing, it's the bright green lies and what we are told by the big greens. So which of these two scenarios would cause less harm to the planet? Here they are. One, all cars traveling at 100 miles per gallon, or two, all cars traveling at just 1 mile per gallon. Without giving it much thought, most people and the big greens would respond that the least harmful scenario would be the one with all cars traveling at 100 miles per gallon. But not so fast. Let's consider a world where all cars travel just 1 mile per gallon. It prompts me to ask 5 questions. How many cars would there be globally? Not many. Number two, how many freeways would there be? None. Would there be affordable cross-country high-speed rail service across the USA? Yes. Would homes be smaller and closer together so as to take better advantage of the local public transportation? Yes. Would the natural world would the natural world comprise a much larger portion of the planet and be thriving far more than it is now? Yes. So you get the point. The big greens have convinced most humans that an unlimited number of us can live indefinitely on this planet as long as we power everything with renewable energy. That way of thinking is sheer lunacy. That's what the big greens are doing for us.
Yeah.
And you couple that with the schools of nutrition and the medical industry. Think about how many doctors would be out of work. We'd need 75% fewer medical doctors. Everybody ate like me and you.
Yeah.
So
We we
why
won't
I
be
say
having pandemics.
we have to make we've got to have an incredibly massive information campaign, global information campaign, and maybe we're right on the verge of that happening. That's what keeps me going. Well, maybe there's a tipping point that this news is going to get out there, and it's because of our work that we kept pushing, pushing, pushing and not giving up.
Well, maybe James Cameron will help if we can just piss him off enough.
Well, that's a good conclusion for our broadcast.
Jim, it's been a pleasure speaking with
Yeah.
you, even if a lot of the news is grim.
Yeah,
But
there's not many people like that can understand what I'm talking about, and probably vice versa for you.
hmm. Um, so people can find you at HPJMH. Again, HPJMH stands for Healthy Planet J Morris Hicks and .com. Sign up for your newsletter and I encourage people to do that. And your books are Outcry and Healthy Eating, Healthy World,
And the
and Four Leaf
four leaf guide,
Four
the four
Leaf Guide.
that's the one I wrote with the medical doctor.
Dr. Kerry Graff.
Graph, right?
All right, great talking with you, Jim. We'll see you soon.
Great talking to you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.